Welcome to On Fighting in Thailand, the best news and analysis covering the economics and infrastructure of Muay Thai. I'm Matt Lucas, journalist, commentator, and ex-Muay Thai fighters. Make stronger fighters, make stronger people. Today we will be talking to Pete Peterson as part of our 4-part series on scoring and refereeing. As always, if you'd like to reach me, you can follow me on Instagram, Matt Lucas Muay Thai, or email me at a.matt.lucas@gmail.com. I always respond to my messages. Thanks to all the people that have supported me so far, sharing the podcast, leaving reviews. If you'd like to leave a review, that would be super helpful. You can do so on the iTunes store. Myself, JJ Ferraro, and Stefan Strameyer are releasing a new project called the Muay Thai Panel. It is a clear Patreon account, a monthly subscription-based program that goes over refereeing and scoring. We will also be doing fight reviews. So look forward to releasing that to the public within the week, which directly ties into our conversation today with Pete Peterson. But as always, first I'd like to thank Patrick Rivera for helping me get this show started. And if you are interested in sponsoring the show or developing a business relationship and advertising on here, let me know. The show is growing and it is very, very consistent. So Pete is one of the long-term officials and referees in the States. He goes over a little bit of his background in kickboxing in the Midwest in the 90s before moving into refereeing and officiating. He's reffed and officiated all over the world at the IFMA Games several times, and of course at his very large TBA tournaments in the Midwest every year. So we go over a lot of really great things. Definitely keep an eye out for our talk on scoring and a little bit of some of the movement and triangle position. So without further ado, the interview with Pete Peterson. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Pete. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Well, you have a wealth of experience refereeing. Obviously, you've been a big part of the TBAs, which is the largest tournament in the States. You've also done a lot of judging and refereeing stuff with IFMA and overseas. But why and how did you get into refereeing in the first place?
It was both a choice and almost just kind of by default it happened. I started competing in the early 90s, and it was mostly kickboxing then it evolved to Muay Thai, but there wasn't much Muay Thai in the Midwest here at that time, not competing. And, the gyms that were all TBA gyms. They wouldn't fight each other then. So I started fighting, and then a couple years later I started promoting. And, as a fighter, like today, you fight and you want good officials. You want to have a fair fight. You want to have the right decision made. You don't want to get robbed or felt like you were wrongly done. And you experience that. We experienced teams that if they were the hometown guy, they won because of that reason, whether you beat them based on scoring or not. We've all experienced that kind of thing at some point in our careers. But it really got to me. I wanted better. And then around here in the Midwest, there was no legit sanctioning body really holding shows. They were elsewhere, West Coast, East Coast, just not where we were at. And I started promoting, and then I would throw people together to officiate like everybody else was doing, and it just wasn't good enough. I wanted better because like I profess today, the officials are half of the fight, and the fighters deserve to have the best they can have. We are half the fight. So I'm very passionate about that being right. And so back then I started my own little sanctioning body. I've forgotten what I even called it now. It was just didn't go anywhere, Who was I to do that? But it allowed me to write out rules and write out things, and based on what I had learned from competing, from talking to other officials and promoters, and from studying Muay Thai. And I ended up being asked to referee somebody else's show that was boxing and kickboxing. So I did. And this is in the mid to late '90s,
Hmm.
and I had fun. Um, I felt good, and it went from there. And then when I started promoting more shows, I would, place the officials, but I started officiating too, and then training them because it had to be better. And
Hmm.
honestly, I didn't know what was right or wrong. I knew
Hmm.
what was fair, and I understood how to score pretty much. It wasn't like I learned later. Obviously, you learn as you go. But we had to start somewhere here in the Midwest, and
Hmm.
I was the second person besides the late Tom Latuli in Chicago. I was the only person in the Midwest promoting Muay Thai fights. The
Hmm.
rest were all kickboxing. So it was a slow process. But as we got going here in Iowa, when I moved here, and Pam and I started promoting shows here, and the tournament developed. Uh, we needed to have better officials. We
Hmm.
we did the best we could with having coaches come in, and that's how it started. When coaches weren't having a fighter in the ring, they were helping referee,
Hmm.
and we had to develop. Right, there was no one doing courses here. I didn't know who Tony Myers was or Fred Fitzgerald was,
Hmm.
and so we just went with what we had, and
Yeah.
it developed, and it got better and better and better. And that's kind of how I got into it, just through the passion of wanting the officials to be the best they could be for the fighters.
That makes sense. And how do you feel, sort of looking back at some of your early days refereeing and judging? Do you, compared to now, do you feel like you've learned a lot? And specifically, what have you learned? How do you feel about it, in retrospect?
I've learned a lot, a great deal actually. I didn't know how much I didn't know,
Hmm.
and I think it was 16 when JJ went over to IFMA, and so in 17, I was talking to Michael and I said, I run the officials for the biggest tournament in North America. Why am I just sitting here in the USA? Why am I not going there and get abroad and getting
Hmm.
experience? He said, "Yeah, go." So he approved me to go, and it was an eye opener. I did, the course we took first there for IFMA. To be honest, I was scoring judging fights pretty much with what IFMA says to do,
Hmm.
because in the States here, we all thought that, you know, a body kick or a knee scored way higher than a leg kick or a punch to the face.
Hmm.
That's what we were told, and that's what people assume when they watch fights in the stadiums on YouTube or something. And that wasn't the case. And I never scored that way. I always scored it equal. I didn't
Hmm.
know why. I just felt like that. No, that's effective. That should score too.
Hmm.
And that's how it's always been. I just didn't know that till I went and had that training. So I was pleased that I was not too far off in my
Hmm.
thinking, um, but it was still an eye opener, and it really solidified things for me. And the criteria it's simple. It's gray, but it's black and white too. It's
Hmm.
simple. You just got to pay attention. And so when I went there, it was great because it solidified things for me, and it made things more clear, and it
Hmm.
presented a better avenue for me to develop my officials for TVSA as well.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Getting that continued education, it basically
Yeah.
filters down in a lot of ways. Do you feel that, obviously you have some experience with IFMA and, the shows in the States with TBAs, but do you feel that, the world of stadium Muay Thai is different, or the entertainment world? And, have you done any scoring or refereeing with that?
So I have not really done any scoring refereeing with entertainment or stadium Muay Thai. The only thing I've done is I was fortunate to take the WMC certification course in Bangkok in 2019. I took
Mm-hmm.
that with Jens and Gunter and those guys, and that was right before the adult IFMA WC
Mm-hmm.
in Bangkok there. And on the Friday night, which was a 4-day course. On the Friday night of our course, we all went to Lumpini for the fights,
Mm-hmm.
and we sat in the stands opposite of the gamblers,
Mm-hmm.
and we were scoring the fights. We didn't, it wasn't the official scores, but we used Lumpini scorecards, and we scored based on what how we score with IFMA and with WMC as we did the course. And we had, there's 9 fights on a Friday night. We scored 6 of them. 2 of them were stopped early by cuts. The other 4 we scored all the way through. And I scored based on IFMA and WMC scoring.
Mm-hmm.
And I got all 4 fights correct.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pleased with that. It made me realize that I'm scoring it right. And my understanding is that, gambling controls a lot of those outcomes in the stadiums. And I think it's being, you would know better than I would being there, Matt, but I think it's being addressed now.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that I think the gambling and the control the gambling has had on stadium Muay Thai is what has confused a lot of Americans as far as how scoring is done.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you look at the written rules with IFMA for amateur, WMC, even WBC,
Mm-hmm.
there's only a couple minor differences in the scoring. They all count each strike equal 1 for 1.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
based on effect, a number, power, effect. All those things are still really the same. And I'm not really familiar with entertainment Muay Thai and how you describe that. I've only understood that based on listening to some of
Yeah.
your stuff you've talked about.
Yeah, I refer to entertainment Muay Thai as more like Max Muay Thai, which, Max Muay Thai or Super Champ, even won championship to some extent. Usually 3-minute rounds. The scoring is a bit different, and some of the rules are a little different. For instance, there's no standing 8 count in one championship.
Right.
And also in in a lot of shows people assume that you get knocked down and it's an automatic 10-8 round. That is definitely not the case for shows like Max Muay Thai and other
Okay.
venues.
Okay.
I think you brought up a very good point about the gambling being addressed. The gambling still has a hold on the sport, but it's definitely on the decline as the sport is going more global. And obviously, COVID has had like a tremendous impact on the who's going to the shows and how the shows are organized. So, in some ways, the COVID-19 crisis has been sort of good in revitalizing the sport.
Yeah.
But going back a little bit, you talked about the IFMA and WMC scoring, and I would agree with you that a lot of the scoring systems, IFMA, WMC, WBC, even one championship are very, very similar. But could you briefly give like what you would say is an overview or, a broad sweeping view of what those criteria are?
Yeah. As far as the scoring criteria,
Yeah.
yeah. So that I don't mess it up, I'm going to get my cheat sheet because I don't want to read it in the wrong order, and I should know it by heart. Basically, you're looking. I don't know where it's at right now, so I won't
Oh
prepare for
no, it's not a good cheat sheet if it's not there for you to cheat with.
Here. No, I'll just tell you what it is. So
Yep. Okay.
you've got a you did have a 6-line criteria for IFMA, for example, and
Mm-hmm.
then during 2020 they had a committee and they rewrote the rules and regulations completely, and
Mm-hmm.
in the scoring they added in one more line, which just made the word defense come out more clear. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't written defense in the scoring criteria before that. And my understanding, and I could be incorrect, but my understanding was when there's a draw round at an IFMA show, for example, in the tournament, they don't fight a 4th round, where in TBA we fight a 4th round. And
Mm-hmm.
so they don't fight that. And so they go back to the judges. And one thing the judges looked at was who had the better defense to decide
Mm-hmm.
that winner. And because they have to decide right then. Well, when they rewrote these guidelines and the scoring criteria, defense was in there. I think in line like line 5 or something. It number one was number of landed strikes on an unblocked target that were
Mm-hmm.
thrown with clean, clear intent to score. Just throwing it out there pitter patter isn't going to be counting as scoring, but when you throw it with intent,
Mm-hmm.
it's unblocked as scoring. And next is power of those strikes. So if you're equal in all of that, both red and blue corner, was one throwing them strikes harder? Was he or she landing them harder? So more power. If that's all equal, you go to three, which now it gets into your effect, which can be summarized as aggression, uh, um, less bruising, more exhaustion. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where a lot of the gray comes in. It's
Mm-hmm.
not so gray with the number of strikes and the power. But
Mm-hmm.
when you summarize all those things like effect and bruising and exhaustion into one thing called effect, it can become gray. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll come back to that. And then you've got uh, I believe style or defense comes next. Again, I should know off the top of my head, but it's always right in front of me when I'm giving courses and things.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm judging, I know also at TBA, when I have all of our four rings of officials, we have like 30 some officials, so our teams can rotate. And I put down a scoring criteria cheat sheet right in front of their table. So they always know if they are stuck on, man, how do I decide that? It's so close. There's something that criteria they can get to that will give them a winner. They got to create a winner. I don't allow 10-10 draws here in TBA
Mm-hmm.
unless there was a point deduction for the one that won the round. So now you give that point to the other fighter and they
Yeah,
get a
so
10-10.
it'd be like a
Yeah.
9-9 round.
Well, a 10-10.
A
I
10
would
10.
plus it to the other fighter
Mm-hmm.
because it's 10-point must. I used to go 9-9, and that was incorrect, which I learned at IFMA. Uh, but anyway, you've got style and defense style and less infractions of the rules. So when you have into the gray area, when you have two fighters and one just looks like they're real solid Muay Thai, real traditional Muay Thai stance, they're throwing everything. You've got one that's more of a Dutch style fighter or a brawler, um, and that brawler is more effective. They're landing more. They're throwing more power. They might throw less weapons than the other friend that's more technical, but they're throwing harder and more. And you'll have coaches go, "This is a Muay Thai tournament. My fighter had better Muay Thai. They threw everything. It's a fight with Muay Thai rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you got to look at. It's not. There are all kinds of styles of Muay, right? There's Muay Mat, Muay Cow. I
Yeah,
mean, there's
yeah.
all these fighters have styles, right? You've expressed that in your book as well.
Yeah.
And so there's a gray area there. You have to look at the actual number one criteria and follow that criteria down the line to make your decision. So that's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
overview of it. And when you look at IFMA, WMC, WBC, even they might word things different in their written rules, but the translation comes out the same. And
Mm-hmm.
really, the main difference is that with amateur, you're not an automatic 10-8 like you mentioned with one championship or max. You're not an automatic 10-8 on a standing 8 or a knockdown. It's based on who won the round. But with professional, it's an automatic 10-8. And
Yeah.
and
Go ahead.
well, for the written rules anyway, it is. I
Uh-huh.
understand, like you're explaining, that can be
Yeah.
changed based on the stadium or the entertainment.
Yeah. Yeah. I know like WBC rules does not make a knockdown an automatic 10-8 round.
You're
So
right. They don't. You're right.
like, if we are fighting and say I am dominating the round, and then you hit me and I go down, but I get back up and I continue to dominate the round. It is not a 10-8 round. I believe it's like a 9-9 round. Or, I need to go back. But it's basically, it doesn't
Yeah.
destroy the round for you,
That round. Right.
which
Right.
I think is pretty important because, like, if as a fighter, this happened to me in an amateur fight. Like you get a 10-8 round for whatever reason, like that. There's the fight. You lost.
Yeah. Right.
There's like really
Right.
no point of continuing to fight, or you just like have to go hell for broke, and it doesn't make for good fights.
Right.
And in IFMA, an 8 count is like it's the same as getting scored on like a body kick or something.
Right. With TBAs, our Muay Thai Expo TBSA, we changed that a couple years in. I tried to start, migrating more towards IFMA scoring to make our stuff more legit. And we added things in. We don't do it exactly the same as IFMA as far as all of the scoring protocols, but we follow that scoring criteria, all those lines. And I teach it that way. And when we started doing it that way with the 8 counts, it was better.
Mm-hmm.
Where it can go wrong, Matt, is when a newer judge or referee takes it too literal, this precautionary count, because you have a compulsory count too, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like 3 counts in one round, the fight is over.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are having you're doing an 8 count, almost too precautionary.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've got 3 of those really quick. Fight's over.
Yeah.
When
Mm-hmm.
really the fight didn't have to be over yet. The fighter was okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really the referees have to be on point and really know how to be able to see when that 8 count needs to be called,
Mm-hmm.
and not wait too long either.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same with the clinch. When some guys break the clinch too early, or they
Mm-hmm.
let it go too long with no activity and they don't break it yet.
Yeah.
Those are some of the complaints you get, and I think that needs to be really a focal point for training.
Yeah, you hit on a couple of interesting points there. Obviously, newer judges making bad decisions, or just inexperienced decisions.
Right, right.
Can you tell me about a time when you were unsure about a decision that you made, or like, looking back at, you're like, maybe that wasn't the best decision. What was it? And how did you learn from it?
Yeah, I've there's been 2 times that I've lost sleep, literally lost sleep the next few days because I'm passionate about it, and I felt like, man, did I get that wrong? I'm not wrong very often, but I'm not perfect. Nobody is. We do the best job we can, and we're going to get some of these fights wrong sometimes because they are so close,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to see sometimes. Excuse me, but it's not an ego thing. It's me wanting to make sure that those fighters I judged got the best of me and they got a fair judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there was a fight, the main fight that I still bugs me, even though I've got confirmation on my scoring, was our Tournament of Champions a few years back. We had it was a final fight, A class fight of the day, and these are defendable titles for the TBASA. So they were 5 round fights, and they had no pads, just elbow pads,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was full rules Muay Thai except for no knees to the head. We still
Mm-hmm.
are not allowing that, but the elbows to the head, yes.
Yeah.
And so 5 round fight, and it was Luke Lacey against Julian. Is it Nguyen or Wen? I forget how you say that name. Some are different.
Oh
But
yeah,
he was with
Nguyen from City Tong in Boston, right?
yeah, and he was with at that time he was with Ibir
Oh right,
with
right.
Lynx, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was one of the judges. I wanted experience as I could for some of those A class fights, so I stepped in on that fight. And looking back, I wish I hadn't because so 2 of us had Luke winning the fight and one did not.
Mm-hmm.
And Luke and I've known Luke since he was 7 years old. So I've watched him fight. I've refereed him. I've judged him. I've
Mm-hmm.
judged him losing and winning. And for me, it's as IFMA teaches. I see red corner and blue corner.
Mm-hmm.
I make it a point to not be biased no matter how much, because I know almost everybody around here that
Yeah,
competes.
yeah,
So I'm going to end up officiating my friends.
yeah.
Uh, and so it's imperative that I stay neutral whenever the fight's going on. And I was. But what I saw based on amateur scoring was I saw Luke winning that fight. And so did one other judge. And it was a very technical, very good, very close battle. It was a great battle between both those guys. Very,
Mm-hmm.
very, very good Muay Thai on both sides. Um, and right away, their team came unglued, and there was a scene, and I was accused of favoritism for Dean because I've known Dean so long, Luke's dad and the coach,
Yeah, 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 of
and
course.
and that team, and I like all the teams, and we've patched things up since, but
Yeah.
that team, they were on a winning streak. They had already won 4 titles, all 4-1. It was down to Julian, and I didn't realize that at the time when I was judging,
Mhm.
but I lost sleep, Matt. I thought, man, did I get that wrong?
Mhm.
I had to go back and watch it, and I still felt like he won. I'm like, I ended up sending it to Elias Dolopsis. I ended up sending it to
Mhm.
him. He was my first jury when I was training IFMA. I was in his
Mhm.
ring, and he was a great mentor when I first had that experience. Um, and he watched it, he scored it, and he reaffirmed what I said.
Mhm.
He had, I think I had 4 rounds maybe for Luke or something, and he had 3.
Mhm.
But the way he explained it was what I was thinking. He said
Mhm.
if it was a amateur scoring, if was scoring, this is Luke won the fight,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I felt better. But even though I did that, I got my confirmation. That did not, you know, ease their concern in their camp. Because you always feel like, no, we won that fight, and
Yeah.
it
So
really
it's a
comes
bit.
down to. Go ahead.
There's always a bit of confirmation bias. Oh,
Yeah,
we won that fight. The guy next to you is saying the same thing. It's a little bit of an echo chamber. You obviously want to believe you won, even if maybe you didn't. There's all sorts of factors going into it as well. Um,
yeah.
So, was there like a big difference between the two scores that went for Luke and the one score that went for Julian? Was it like a wide gap? Was it like 49-48, then, 48-49 and
Like a
49-48?
49-46, 48-47. So it wasn't a big gap. No,
Yeah, yeah. So it
it
was
was
like
just it was a split.
a 1 round gap
Yeah,
basically.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean that's when you look at standard deviation of scores, like if there's 3 judges and there's only a 1 point difference between them, I don't really
Right.
think that's that bad. Versus like oh there's 3 judges and like one's 50-47, another guy's like 48-47, and a third guy is like 47-50 or something crazy, like that
Total
deviation
opposites.
is
Yeah,
too big.
you're watching different fights then.
Yeah, exactly. But you talked about that time where you were unsure of yourself, and obviously there's stuff to talk about in terms of having to deal with criticism. But let's focus a little bit about the basics of refereeing, or some of the early mistakes that people made. Because one of the things you recently put on was this scoring seminar. So you obviously are building officials. What are some of the things that you're seeing as early mistakes of referees and officials?
So for referees, if they're inexperienced, the first thing is just simple movement around and positioning.
Mm-hmm.
They'll find themselves not behind the fight, not getting that triangle position
Mm-hmm.
quick enough, and staying there, remaining there, and they will tend to like basketball shuffle and look uneasy and nervous. Their body mechanics will show the nerves and inexperience, and they just need to be walking and turn and walk. A normal gait, stand tall, and be in that triangle. There's a procedure, and that's one of the biggest things is the position and the movement. You can
Mm-hmm.
see the nerves. They need to be in control and be firm. And if they are not in that right triangle position, they can miss a foul or not see something, or it can be an unsafe thing with one of the fighters, and they miss that as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
imperative they have that triangle, not get caught behind the 2 fighters.
Yeah,
That's one of the
and
first things. Yeah.
just for people to sort of understand the triangle analogy, if the 2 fighters are sort of the base of the triangle, the referee needs to be the the top point at all times,
Right.
so he or she can see both fighters clearly. And then
Right.
the referee also needs to rotate around the boxers as they're fighting, so he or she is not staying in that same top point. They need to go to the
Right.
bottom point as well. Correct?
Correct. Yes. And then there's also what you look at a closed fighters versus open fighters. So like something we don't often talk about or think about is if red corner is conventional and blue corner is southpaw.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've got a right to a left, lead. And if you're on the outside of that, you're on where both their leads are.
Mm-hmm.
Referees on the closed side. If he goes to where their back legs are together,
Mm-hmm.
same side, he's on the open side, and you can see more from the open side.
All
So you
right.
want to try to be in the open side if at all possible. Now, obviously, if you're both conventional, both southpaw, you're going to pick a side and you're going to change sides, rotate around.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have those fighters who are opposite, you try to go to the open side. But then you have fighters that just change back and forth, and at that point you got to say, okay, I'm just going to pretend they're the same, and I'm going to move around as I normally would,
Mm-hmm.
and be aware. Yeah.
So besides that very important positioning, hitting that triangle, are there other basics of refereeing that you see a lot of people missing or need help with?
Yes, I mean there's so much protocol for a referee. It's when you lay it all out, it's simple, but it's not easy because there are a lot of pieces to it that you have to think about at all times, and that takes training and protocol training and drilling, not just refereeing.
Mm-hmm.
So, like for example, besides the positioning and movement, uh, being commanding with your voice, knowing when to stop and break.
Mm-hmm.
How do you break? Are you breaking correctly? Are you breaking safely, not only for the fighters but for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy. We've all seen referees, even in Thailand, get a little too close
Mm-hmm.
or not break, step in a little too haphazardly, and they get just jacked and
Mm-hmm.
and knocked down. And so it's important you break safely. And then when you break them up to stop for a foul, how you're cautioning them. When you send a fighter to the neutral corner and you're counting a down fighter or a standing 8 count for a fighter, are you counting properly? Are you all counting the same speed,
Mm-hmm.
the same manners, the same ways? Are you in a position where you can see the person in neutral corner so they are standing properly and not getting aggressive still, and not getting coached? There are so many things to do. And I feel like, and it's one reason why I've developed these intensive camps, the courses for the weekends, is because I want all of the officials to be consistent in their movement, their hand gestures, their commands, the way they do everything, even counting. I Matt, some of the complaints I've gotten in the earlier years over time because we've had referees from different sanctioning bodies or organizations or other teams come in to have that experience before we developed more. Uh, is they don't like that referee because he breaks the clinch too soon. We like
Mm-hmm.
that guy because he lets it go for a while, even though there's not
Mm-hmm.
activity. They have time, and we don't. That guy's counting way too fast. That guy's like dragging the count out. The guy has time to rest too long. He
Mm-hmm.
recuperates too quick. So that's not good when you have all those inconsistencies, and I see that. And so it's important that they get that all the same as well. You're more professional as an organization if you're all consistent. That's what IFMA strives for too.
Yeah, yeah. Some of those definitely hit home with me and my experience fighting specifically in California. A lot of the referees are breaking it's a Muay Thai fight, but they break the clinch right away. Or looking at some of the fights now, I'm like, what are they even doing? Like the referee verbally says something, but doesn't follow up with any body movement or
Right.
so say for instance the two boxers are engaged in the clinch, they will like lightly touch them and be like break, and the fighters are supposed to listen, but meanwhile you're in this heated exchange and all this stuff is going on, and you need to be, as a fighter you need to be careful to yourself, whereas
Yeah.
in Thailand, the referees are very physical.
Right.
They if for a break they push the fighters they basically pushed him down to like sort of reset the break and physically pull them apart. That way the fight can get back going. Whereas I don't really know why, but it's a lot more of a tender touch in the West.
It seems like it, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It's interesting.
Yeah. So going and talking a little bit about judging, because that's something you've done before, and something we talked about earlier is sort of the gray area of judging, where you're looking more at the effect. So what are signs of effectiveness in scoring?
Well, for example, maybe the fighter does block your leg kick with it. He checks it, but your power is such that it knocks him off balance.
Mm-hmm.
That's still scoring, even
Mm-hmm.
though he had the proper technical block. If his balance was not intact, it still scored.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he returns the kick, but he's off balance returning it,
Mm-hmm.
but it lands in your leg. He's not scoring because he was off balance.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an area where we have to look at that and not just say, well, he landed it. Oh, he blocked it. Was their balance intact?
Mm-hmm.
That goes with the upper body as well. If I'm shelling up and it hits me in my arm here, I don't care how sturdy I am. That's scoring. It's not a block. That's like hitting my thigh. But if I
Mm-hmm.
block with my forearm like my shin, and I'm blocking hard and I'm sturdy, then it's not scoring.
Mm-hmm.
So there are just little things that the judges have to be able to pick up and watch with the balance, and then effect. You mentioned scoring going backwards and forwards. You mentioned that earlier, and that is an area it's gray too, or difficult for some to process because in the old days we used to say, well, going forward is being aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, aggression is really the one that's initiating the exchanges, not just walking forward. I
Mm-hmm.
spent half my career counterfighting and going backwards, and I won most of my fights that way. I teeped a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but I teeped effectively, not just throwing it, still going backwards. I stopped, planted, teeped, went back,
Mm-hmm.
and so you know, judges have to be able to see a fighter going backwards, and are they going backwards and throwing while they're still going backwards, or did they plant for a second to launch an effective, powerful, balanced strike? It
Mm-hmm.
makes a difference.
Yeah.
You look at light skinned fighters versus dark skinned fighters.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at number line 3 of the criteria, it says the fighter who has less bruising wins the
Mm-hmm.
fight. Well, a light skinned fighter is going to show bruising way more than a dark skinned fighter, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of gray. It's easier to
Mm-hmm.
tell that and use that part of the criteria if they're both light skinned fighters.
Mm-hmm.
And then some just bruise easy and some don't bruise easy too. So while that bruising can show us some effect and some damage, um, it's not the end all beat all to that line of the criteria. And the same with the exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
We know if a fighter's exhausted, it's not showing good conditioning. Their usually technique isn't bad. They get off balance more, and they can't throw as much power when they're exhausted. But we've all seen these fights, and I've had to judge fights and also review fights for mad coaches when they lost because their fighter was just right here, and he was marching forward and looked great. His conditioning was great, but the really exhausted guy was picking him apart.
Mm-hmm.
As sloppy as it might have been, he was rocking his head back and battering his body, and he was winning. He just because you have to go to line 1 and 2 before you go to line 3 of the
Mm-hmm.
criteria,
Yeah.
right? So he was winning still. He just wasn't very pretty doing it,
Mm.
and so it's really gets gray there with those kind of things. And you know, in our I'll elaborate too in our as far as how you process all that as a judge. One of the fights we reviewed in our most recent intensive this past month, um, it was such that I started going by exchanges because some of them
Mm-hmm.
weren't quite understanding how to score it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all kinds of ways. Some will be under a table with their fingers counting. Some will do little meters.
Yeah.
Some will take a pen and just kind of on the table, like turn it one way or the
Mm-hmm.
other for
Mm-hmm.
left or blue. So they got a physical way plus mentally, visually putting it all together, and it helps. I've always just watched by exchanges, and it's helped for me that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to elaborate on that this past course more, and it helped some of the guys better because they weren't quite understanding. They were getting lost. So much was happening in that round
Mm-hmm.
that they were forgetting what was happening. And so we had the benefit, obviously, as you know, when we're reviewing later and teaching to rewind,
Mm-hmm.
and play over, rewind, play it over, and really analyze and dissect things where you don't live. But the more you do it in training, the more you're going to get it live without having to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this one fight we did, the exchanges were going. I said, okay, the first exchange happened where either ref resets them or they reset naturally. That's an exchange,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and right. And so I said, okay, who won? Who won that exchange? Who's up right now? And they understood. They got it right. They're seeing it. I went, okay, move on. Next exchange, a reset to stop. Okay, now who's up? They got it right. So right now we have this and this. Next exchange, other guy was up. So that's an example. In this fight, the first half of the round, they were both really even on your lines 1 and 2 of the scoring.
Mm-hmm.
No one was really up in numbers of strikes landed and stuff and power. They're pretty good. But one of them, I forget, I'll say red. Red corner had a couple really good off balances in the clinch to land his knee.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had defense in there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that aggression right there as well, that style, all those lower line criteria kind of fell into that turn. And so if you were stuck on that first half of that round, well, red won it because he had better defense,
Mm-hmm.
and they were even otherwise. So
Mm-hmm.
defense was number 5, line 5 of the criteria, right? The second half of that round, blue corner really started to excel and pick up as red kind of fatigued a little bit, and blue scored significantly more strikes landed clean than red did.
Mm-hmm.
So on line 1 of the criteria, blue won that second half of that round. So now you go, okay, we got a split round, half and half. Who won?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you go to the first line of the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Blue won the last half on the first line. Red won the first half on the fifth line.
Mm-hmm.
Blue's the winner,
Mm-hmm.
right? Defense didn't overshadow the scoring of the second half. So that's how I tried to break it down so they had a better understanding of what to look for.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed to help when they started getting the right guy winning
Mm-hmm.
after that each time.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of did that. But there's a lot of gray, Matt, with judges. You've got to be able to look at the whole criteria, even though you are trying to score it and place priority in order from top to
Mm-hmm.
bottom.
Mm-hmm.
You still got to look at the
Yeah.
overall criteria.
Yeah, I think, judging based on exchanges is probably the simplest way to,
I think so.
it makes the fight very, very clear in a lot of ways because a lot of the other criterias like defense, balance, other factors like exhaustion are harder to recognize sometimes or to put a significant point value on. And
Right.
I at least feel they come in as more of a tertiary angle. Okay, you and it becomes more involved as you score more, and you're more aware of like the exchange value. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because okay, I hit you, and you show signs of exhaustion. That hit is no longer just like an effective hit; it's a highly effective hit. So it becomes more of a higher, like I won the exchange by more. And
Right.
so instead
Right.
of just saying, "Oh, he won the exchange," you're also giving a little bit of a level or added value to it. Um, I know
Exactly.
Elias does the counting on his hands.
Uh-huh.
He's been taught that by WMC coaches. Sometimes I will do the dial, which you said, or I often think about it as a horse race between
Yeah.
two athletes. Okay, Pete in the blue is leading. Okay, Matt is coming up in the red. Red is now they're even. Red is edging ahead. Blue had two big exchanges. Okay, now he is winning. Okay, now blah blah blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Exactly.
so go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, just real quick, also why I personally like exchanges. The way to do that is because like it's easy to when you do exchanges. The one exchange, red may have won it okay, clear, but not dominantly. The
Mhm.
next exchange, like you mentioned, they really scored it.
Mhm.
The next exchange, blue might win it more than what red did the first exchange,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? And it's easier to keep track in exchanges of who's doing a little bit more than overall for me.
Mhm.
So I'm able to
Mhm.
say, well, blue, they each won two exchanges, but blue won his exchanges in a far more dominant fashion than
Mhm.
red won his exchanges. So blue's winning. It's yeah,
Mhm.
I like that. But I tell my students that when you look at like we have our fights here in the States, there's novice, B, and A. And I think that the hardest fights to judge are C when they're really sloppy and brawling, and then A when they're so
Mhm.
good and experienced that they're going so fast and so there's so much involved there, it's hard to see and keep track of it. Where B is kind of like, I'm not sloppy anymore. I'm not quite as fast as the A class guys. It's just you almost have more time to score.
Mhm.
It feels like
Mhm.
they're
Mhm.
almost in that middle range where yeah, I can score that. That's what I what I've seen anyway.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So there's just maybe two more things that I want to touch on. I know you're busy, so um, the first one is we talked about it briefly off the podcast, and you mentioned it before. But you recently did a referee and officials seminar. Can you just tell me a bit more about that?
Like the whys and that reads that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
the whys,
Yeah,
all the
what we did.
details, sort of what was it
Yeah.
like? Why did you do it? How did it go?
So as I was saying before, so the last few years we've been trying at the World Expo, trying to get dedicated officials, meaning they had no fighters in the tournament,
Mm-hmm.
or they could be there the whole time. When you get to where you have to have coaches that are high level that can do it, that come in and officiate to judge or referee when they're in the downtime, their minds are still partially on their fighter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they're not fully committed and engaged in that officiating position. So it takes away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard when you have the largest tournament, you have to look at like 30 plus officials being there for 4 days straight. It's hard here to when you're going to IFMA, you're committed to go overseas internationally
Mm-hmm.
and do that. You're there for that time. Here it's just a little different, and so that's one reason we wanted more dedicated officials. But also this past June tournament, we had that year off from COVID in 2020, and it could have been the break. We're missing some of the higher level officials. We're missing some that we usually have from Canada too because they couldn't come down. So 2021, well, it was our largest tournament numbers to date, over 1,000 registered. We're missing a lot of our key components with officiating, and it showed. And also, even some of the experienced ones, where they're rusty. I don't know what happened,
Mm-hmm.
but it was for me personally, Matt. It was the worst year. I didn't know this as I was doing it because I'm running around wearing different hats.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got back, and we had some things happen there that forced me to review some fights on my own. Well, reviewing those fights caused me to review all 500 plus fights that we had. I had them all the
Mm-hmm.
scorecards on my desk, Dropbox. I went through a few hundred of those 500 fights because I saw experienced judges referee for the first time, or I thought was the first time, and they were horrible. I saw
Mm-hmm.
experienced referees making amateur mistakes, and it was causing some early stoppages. It was causing some wrong decisions,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't have that. I cannot
Yeah.
have that at our tournament. I'm the one that has to deal with that, and
Mm-hmm.
so with that said, it made me feel that all of our, and I'm not saying this against any other instructor, trainer, organization, or anything else. Personally, for TBSA, it made me feel that all of our online courses, all of our in-person courses we've done to date just don't work.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't doing enough. They can't be 3 hours or 4 hours. They just cannot be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you cannot shadow referee. So if you're going to train a referee, just reading the rules, the protocols, that's not good enough. They need time drilling those protocols
Mm-hmm.
and building confidence in their abilities.
Mm-hmm.
So I said I need to do a camp, a 3 day camp, an intensive, and Patrick Rivera gave me the name intensive because, which
Yeah.
it makes sense. We're getting really intense with this stuff over those 3 days. It's long hours. It's like
Mm-hmm.
25 hours in 2.5 to 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
So we watch a lot of fights and dissect them. We do a lot of referee drilling, and we analyze everything A to Z from both a judge and a referee. And I want them all to know both positions. For the example we mentioned, if a referee gets hurt and they can't
Mm-hmm.
finish that event, you get a pull from the other ones you have there. And if you're doing a show and you only have three judges, a referee, and a timekeeper, which judge can fill in? Maybe the referee can still judge, but he can't physically walk around the ring to be safe for the fighters. He's going to
Mm-hmm.
trade jobs. So I want everyone to know both positions.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a judge and you know refereeing, you can then see better. That wasn't a foul. He shouldn't have cautioned them,
Mm-hmm.
or he missed that illegal sweep, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And as a referee, you can also see more of the scoring things and understand what's going on in that fight, um, and understanding the eight counts. When is a good time to call that standing eight count? As a judge, you're thinking, "Damn it, he called it too soon," but now I got to
Mm-hmm.
score that accordingly. You know, um,
Right.
so they're both really important, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
wanted this because I wanted better for our tournaments, our organization, and it wasn't critiquing others. I got to look out for ours. So I did it, and it worked out really well. We cut down our splits, Matt, at our October tournament
Mm.
by 51% from June to October. Granted, it's a smaller
Oh, that's
tournament,
good. Mm-hmm.
but it was a great result. I was able to watch, and some of the ones that were their first time in my intensive in September.
Mm-hmm.
I had them referee a few fights at the tournament champions, and I watched them, and they did great.
Mm-hmm.
Nerves, but they built confidence. I was right there with them. I made some adjustments in a rest period. They made the adjustments, and it was great. I was very,
Mm-hmm.
very pleased. So it showed me that in-person intensive works.
Mm.
So that's the reason why what we're doing.
Awesome. And the last thing is, something that I always like to ask people is, uh, what are do you feel like being a referee or judge has career options in the states? And if so, what are they?
Um, it's hard in the states. You look at like the guys like you've interviewed that do one championship. That's a career for them. They're pretty busy right now, right? And
Yeah,
I'm sure they're
yeah.
making decent income with that. And it's the highest profile refereeing right now there is, I think, and internationally and in the states. There's so many factions, so many sanction bodies, so many redneck shows in every city. You know, and so many athletic commissions that don't all see the same thing the same way. So for a person to have a career here, actual career, it's almost if you develop it enough where you're the one running courses or teaching or doing training seminars, whatever, that could be a career in it. But I think that
Mm-hmm.
it's more of a hobby thing to keep you in the game. For some of us that can't
Mm-hmm.
compete anymore, it's a great way to still be there right in the action and contribute to Muay Thai sport. But
Mm-hmm.
like for us, the big tournament is good for them, but it's once a year. It's not a career. I think it's hard to
Yeah.
have a career here in officiating. It's just something you do when it comes up that keeps you involved in the sport and allows you to contribute back to that sport. But you got to put the time in, like we say, so that you are giving the best job you can for those fighters.
Yeah.
But career-wise, that's a tough one, man. It's few and
Yeah.
far between, I think.
Well, hopefully that there are more career options.
I
The
hope.
sport is definitely growing. There are the full time people, or like well paid people on one championship.
Yeah.
People like JJ are definitely making it a very active part time job. So
Yeah.
hopefully it grows. Wrapping things up, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
Um, Not really. I think you covered quite a bit. Actually, it was pretty cool. The one thing that just still stands out to me is, the organizations in the states here going out of their way to put on courses are myself with TBSA and Stefan and JJ with USMF.
Hmm.
And um, I think that with us and them and myself, we're not getting enough people taking them and being serious with
Hmm.
it. I think that it would really solidify a lot of things if more coaches, if every gym, imagine this, Matt, if every gym that comes to a TBSA June tournament, which is over 250 gyms, if every gym sent one student, just one, to a course at some point in that year,
Hmm.
they would all be better prepared in those tournaments to compete and win
Hmm.
because they would all have that liaison.
Hmm.
When we go to IFMA, whether it's me or JJ or whoever is the referee, we'll go back and meet with the team when they have their meetings at night and say, here's what we're seeing, here's what we were told. You guys got to look at this. And
Hmm.
it really helps that team prepare. But I think too
Hmm.
many coaches feel like they already know. So what's the point? They've been doing it for years, but
Hmm.
we all know that we don't all
Yeah.
know the criteria. So I just feel like I wish more would get involved and get involved in the officiating side of things so they are better prepared and don't. It would just save a lot of heartache and other arguments after a fight if they knew the
Mm.
rules. Because the majority of the time, Matt, the majority of the time I've reviewed fights, I've reviewed a lot of fights for disgruntled coaches,
Hmm.
and I would say 85 to 90% of the time, uh, the score was correct.
Yeah. Hmm.
They were not correct. Their fighter should have done more to convince a judge that he or she should have won. And there's been times where that coach has said something happened in that fight, referee did a bad job, and I watch it and I don't know if they were in their mind somewhere else creating something, but it never even happened at all
Hmm.
where they said it. It's just interesting. We whenever I teach, I'm sorry to make that a long answer to your question. I apologize. Whenever whenever I can get long winded, I'm really passionate about this part of the sport. But
Yeah.
whenever I do my courses, one of the first things I talk about is all the multiple viewpoints.
Hmm.
Because when you look at a fight, you have the referee viewpoint, the judge's
Hmm.
viewpoint, the coach's viewpoint, the fighter viewpoint, the spectator's viewpoint, and you have
Hmm.
the video.
Hmm.
Video tells the truth, but from
Hmm.
one angle. But
Yeah.
there's so many right. There's so many viewpoints that happen that can uh, interfere or even infect the
Hmm.
fight, and we have to be able to know which ones to pay attention to. The referee and the judges. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
And you know, that's how I feel.
Awesome. Well, just to conclude things, is there somewhere that people can follow along with you, and/or do you have any upcoming uh, referee seminars or criteria, or uh, things that people can join on in on?
I do actually. April 1st through 3rd is our next TBASA officials intensive weekend.
Hmm.
So we already have one coming up again because
Yeah.
of the interest. That's going to be right
Awesome.
here in Des Moines, Iowa again. Otherwise, they can go to MuayThaiTournaments.com,
Hmm.
and our information is always on there. TBASanction.org is the parent website, but Muay Thai, it's very busy. MuayThaiTournaments.com is a little more streamlined,
Hmm.
but it's also the tournament. The June Expo coming up, we're already ahead in numbers compared to 21 and 19. So we're looking at another record year. Canada's coming back in now.
Hmm.
We could meet 1,200 in June. which would be another record-breaking year. And people sign up now because it's already well over 300,
Awesome.
and we're still 4 months out. So yeah, that's kind of it.
Awesome.
I appreciate you bringing me on, Matt.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for your time, Pete, and what you've done for the sport. Definitely a pleasure talking to you.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Matt.
So that was a great interview with Pete. Definitely appreciate all that he does for the sport. I thought there were a lot of really interesting points there. You know, a lot of the big sanctioning bodies like WMC, WBC, even IFMA have very similar scoring criteria. Very much based on effective aggression, effectiveness of the blows. Also breaking down the exchanges. You win enough exchanges, you win the fights. And that's a much more clear and easy way for people to understand how the fight is going and which way. Also, getting into some of the nuances about breaking the athletes. You know, how physical the referees are out here in Thailand. And again, just hitting on some of the movement and triangle position stuff. I thought it was a great talk with Pete, and I look forward to his seminar coming up in early April. It's April 1st to the 3rd. I don't think I will attend, but definitely keep your eye out for it. And just to close, myself, JJ Ferraro, and Stefan Strommeyer are releasing the Muay Thai panels, which is a monthly subscription-based platform going over all things scoring and referee related. We will be doing fight reviews, also looking at positioning for referees, how to score effectively. We're excited to launch this program, and we are dropping it next week, probably by the time this podcast is out. And lastly, if you would like to support the podcast and or advertise on here, definitely reach out to me. I'm looking for business relationships. This has been On Fighting in Thailand, the best news and analysis covering the economics and infrastructure of Muay Thai. I'm Matt Lucas, journalist, commentator, and ex-Muay Thai fighter. Make stronger fighters, make stronger people.